The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Here is a frightening statistic. A girl or woman is killed every 48 hours in this country. Tonight, why some analysts want it called femicide and what's needed to stop the violence. Then, Jayan Jagannathan finds out how digital learning could transform the classrooms of tomorrow. It's Monday, April 17th, and that's next on The Agenda. Almost 200 women and girls in Canada were killed in 2022, primarily by men, often by partners or family members. These kinds of cases are up 27% compared to pre-COVID numbers from 2019. That, according to a new report from the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability. With us for insight into what's going on and how to address it, let's welcome, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Bree Waligorski, Steering Committee member at the Feminist Alliance for International Action. And here in our studio, Megan Walker, Vice Chair of the London Police Services Board, and Nneka McGregor, Director and co-founder of Women's Centre for Social Justice, also known as Women at the Centre. And I'm going to ask our director, there we go, to put the chyron up. And Women at the Centre, you see, begins with a capital W and ends with a capital E. It's all about we, right, Nneka?
Absolutely.
It's all about we. Okay, very good. Thank you, you two, for being here, and Bree for being there on the line from Winnipeg, Manitoba for us. Let's start with, Megan, I think we need a definition here. Femicide is what?
Well, femicide is generally understood to be the killing of women and girls because of their sex or gender. And that is the easy definition. Of course, this report that Nneka has just opened her page to outlines a little more in detail around that.
Well, let's actually do, I'm going to pluck an excerpt from the report here,
Okay.
and then we'll go on with more questions. Sheldon, if you would, bring this up and I'll read along. It has been 5 years since the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability began to document the killings of women and girls across this country. During this time, at least 850 women and girls have lost their lives in Canada. One woman or girl is killed every 48 hours. Where information is known, men are the majority of those accused. Nneka, the significance of the report you hold in front of you is what?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging that the report was drafted by Dr. Myrna Dawson and her team, which is Angelica Zeka and Hayley Angus. And the work is really traumatic, right? It's traumatic to do the research to identify all these murdered women and girls. But more significantly, or as significantly, is the impact that it has on society as a whole, the impact it has on the family members of individuals who've been murdered, and then the call to action amongst politicians, amongst everybody in the community to get involved and understand the complexities and also the simplicities behind these types of killings. Everybody has a role to play.
Bree, can I just understand, has this kind of research not been done before?
I think it has been done before, but not using indicators that we haven't really been paid much attention before historically. So I think we know gender-based violence is really nuanced, really complex. And so seeing it with a wider lens, I think allows us to see the story for what it is. It's not like femicide is new. Femicide's been happening forever. But we're more savvy in how to grab those numbers, I think.
Let's just drill down a little deeper here, and that is the report also found that at least 1 in 5 women and girls killed by a male accused was Indigenous. And your organization focuses on Indigenous women's rights. And we have to start by asking the question, why do you think Indigenous women and girls are more vulnerable than the rest of the population to gender-based violence?
Yeah, it's really shocking. It's a really important part of the story. It's really important to think of gender-based violence as an expression of power, as a misuse of power and abuse of power. So when looking at that, those who hold the least power in society are the most vulnerable. So because of colonialism, sexism, genocide, all of the things. Indigenous women have been maneuvered out of places of social power, and so have been more vulnerable. When we see the effects of that in this report and every day.
Megan, I want to ask this question, and I don't know if there's an elegant way to ask it, so I'm just going to come right out and ask it. How do you know a woman is killed or a girl is killed because of their sex?
Well, it's well known because of systemic barriers that women face and the issues women face on an ongoing basis to advocate for equality rights and to be free from oppression. And so, you know, when you are considered to be inferior and you're with a partner who continues to abuse you as part of his need for power and control, there is a definite power imbalance, and those women will continue to face discrimination throughout this country, which is why we are asking that this be named as femicide so that we can start talking about the issues and start a major public awareness campaign.
Nneka, can you pick up on that? The significance of labeling this femicide as opposed to just murder. What's the importance of doing that?
Well, I think there is a real difference between the characteristics of the killings of women that differs from the killings of men. So when you have male victims versus female victims, there's a series of differences that has been shown in research, most recently by research done by Myrna Dawson.
Like what?
And so, for example, when women and girls are murdered, there is, oftentimes it's by somebody who knows them, right? So women and girls are killed by either a family member or it's somebody that they've been in an intimate relationship with, which is very different from when men are killed, who are usually killed by an acquaintance or a friend. Women are killed by somebody who knows them. Also, the level of violence that is used in the killing of women, oftentimes it's labeled as overkill, so there is such horrific brutality that's associated with it. Also, when women and girls are killed, there is a pattern and in the modus of their killing. So women are often shot, they're stabbed, they are strangled, which is very different again from when men are killed. And
Can I jump in on that?
Please do.
Men are strangled, men are stabbed, men are shot as well.
Yeah,
what's the difference?
Not to the same degree. Not to the same degree. And when you look at how many people are murdered in the context, for example, of a family, a domestic relationship, it is overwhelmingly women who are overwhelmingly killed by men. And so when people try to label this as a gender-neutral act of violence, it actually isn't. This research has shown, as other research, that this is a very gendered type of killing, and therefore calling it femicide will actually illuminate that gendered disparity, the gender difference behind it.
Bree, let me pick up with you on that. So I guess we are to infer from this that there's very little killing of women by women. This is a mostly male-on-female phenomenon. Is that right?
I think if you look at the report, overwhelmingly, I would say.
And therefore, we need to call it what it is. Is that where you're coming from?
I think, and others in the sector think that by using the word femicide really highlights what's actually going on here and the background of it. So I do think, the more we use that word and bring attention to it, the numbers are staggering. The numbers show the story, but we're just, we always sort of give excuses for the story or other reasons. But at the heart of it, at the heart of it is the violence is gender-based.
Megan, you were on the Abused Women's Centre in London, right? You worked there, what, 3.5 decades, something like that?
Yeah, well, I guess 28 years or something, yeah.
Okay. So you've seen way too much of this, obviously, in your time. What are some of the main causes for femicide?
Well, as I said earlier, it is a systemic issue that impacts all women and all girls, where they are considered to be disposable. We have seen recently a woman's body found in a landfill, for instance. There are, when you're considered disposable as a woman, there are numerous atrocities committed against you. And it really fundamentally is around a man's desire to gain and maintain power and control over a woman. And if he feels he is losing that power or control, He will threaten women over and over again, and eventually may, in many cases, as we've seen here, follow through on those threats and kill that woman. And sometimes it's a murder-suicide because the philosophy is from the man, if I can't have you, nobody can, and I'm going to take your life. Sometimes children are the targets because the man may think, well, I'm going to kill my wife, but then she would never suffer any, trauma from that. So I'm going to kill my daughter, so she'll suffer a lifetime of trauma. So fundamentally, when I've worked with women and girls, they don't, their parents or loved ones don't walk into the office and say, it was a great, happy marriage, and all of a sudden, he killed her. And that may be the perception, because for women to survive in the environment, they often have to say it's a great marriage. But in reality, she would have faced a long time of, abuse and torture and isolation and using her children against her and all of these things before it would lead to her, death by femicide. And we have such a long way to go in educating the public about what's happening and the role the public has in asking the questions of women and interfering if they hear anything so that they can potentially save the lives of women. And I believe all of these killings, 850 women and girls, are preventable. And had somebody intervened, or had we had a criminal or family justice system that understood the issues, we could have prevented all of these femicides.
I see you leafing through the report here, Neko, which suggests to me you want to make a point.
I have several points.
Okay.
So just to go back to what Megan was saying around the losses that beyond the women themselves who were murdered, the report highlights that between 2018 and 2022, over the last 5 years, there's been about 850-something children who are left motherless because their mothers were taken and were murdered. And then the second point around how this is a preventable issue is that if there is a way that the society looks at violence against women, right? There's a way that society sort of normalizes. Myrna calls it, there is an intimacy discount where men who have been accused of violence against their intimate partners are never charged with the level of the degree of harm, right, that's been caused. So they are given these discounts that allows them to feel that they can act with impunity. And so what society has failed to do is to bring accountability into the work. And it's failed to bring accountability not just to the perpetrators of the violence, but also to the systems itself, because these individuals might be acting as an individual in the killing of their spouse and their children, but there is a systemic issue that allows that type of violence to continue. There's a systemic issue that it encourages that type of violence and doesn't hold these men accountable, which makes them feel they can do it again. And just to go back to the killings of Indigenous women, when you think about the percentage of Indigenous women in the Canadian context, to have 1/3 of the victims of this femicide be Indigenous tells you a lot about the anti-Indigenous racism that exists in our systems, not just in the criminal legal system, but across the sector, right? In education, in health, everywhere. And not only against anti-Indigenous racism, there's also anti-Black racism, which means that Black women and Black girls are not, there's no data, Steve, no data at all on the killings of Black women, Black girls by femicide. And so what we're trying to do is to elevate, right, this issue, ensure that there is proper data being collected. I want to digress for 2 seconds. A couple of weeks ago, we were speaking at the UN, a side event, UN Commission on the Status of Women, talking about Black femicide, the killings of Black women. And we were on a panel with a brilliant Black woman by the name of Rosalind Page. And Rosalind was talking about the femicides in the US. She started Black Femicide USA. And her data has recently been validated by the FBI that every 6 hours, a Black woman or Black girl is murdered in the United States. We in Canada, we don't know the data for Black women and Black girls, but we have no reason to suspect that it's anything different from what's happening in the US. We just don't have any data. So part of the call...
Well, hang on, it's got to be different. If a woman or girl is being killed every 48 hours in Canada, you can't have a Black woman being killed every 6 hours in Canada.
Well, we don't know. That's the problem. We have no data at all that will show this. If we're saying that 1/3 are indigenous, that's a lot of women.
It's disproportionate, for sure.
It is ridiculously disproportionate. So what we're looking for is the ability to collect data in a way that is meaningful, that is accountable, and that is removed from the biases that is implicit in policing and in the system.
Okay, let me go to Bree on this. You mentioned the word accountability, Nneka. And Bree, if you were going to kind of rethink things so that those who commit these heinous acts are held more accountable, what does that look like?
I think it's pretty clear the system that we have now isn't really working. There's more, like, the nature of gender-based violence means that evidence for that through the court system is really hard to get, hard to prove. And additionally, there's just more reason not to report than to report. So I think we need to really rethink the way that accountability looks like in this. This isn't a case where there's just a handful of people doing this. It's systemic and it's pervasive in our society, and whatever accountability mechanisms we have to show that, right? And so different ways of restorative justice, ways where the survivor can have some say in it and come forward without the risks. We really need to think about all the ways and redo the mechanisms for people to look for support and to get help, because it is so complex and the risks of coming forward are so intense inherently within these issues.
Well, let's do some of that rethinking right here. You, Megan, are on the London Police Services Board. Do the cops need to lay more charges? Do the courts need to impose tougher sentences? Where do we go?
Well, I think it's a combination of many factors. And I think, first of all, we need to stop and say, listen, when we are seeing 850 women and girls murdered over a short period of time, it's a crisis. And it's time for action. And it's not just going to be the police that will solve this problem. And it can start with acknowledging femicide exists in society, legislating that and defining it so that the police have a better ability, if they're going to lay charges, to lay appropriate charges.
Let me just understand that. So you would like, for example, the Ontario legislature, or I guess it'd be criminal code, federal government, to acknowledge in law femicide exists, and therefore the punishments need to be higher if someone's found guilty of that, or what?
What we often see is that the punishments are decreased because it's considered to be a family matter. This is not a family matter. It is not a personal issue. This is an issue that impacts all of society, and we need to recognize that. And, you know, if we're expecting police officers to lay charges, they need to be armed with appropriate charges. We've seen too many men who have killed women charged with things like manslaughter or even aggravated assault, and that doesn't fit what's happening. And when we see across Canada and into the UK that there are initiatives counting the number of dead women that occur, it is, to me, unfathomable that we have to fight to have femicide recognized.
Who are you fighting?
Well, we're fighting right now the federal government. I mean, why should we have to fight for women's rights over and over and over again with this government? And when we present the facts and the statistics and the evidence, it's still not acknowledged that this is a crisis in this country. And my question to the government is, how many women, how many girls have to be killed before you stand up and say, okay, we're going to take action?
Nneka?
So Megan didn't say this, but Megan, myself, and Dr. Myrna Dawson and Claudette Dumont, who's out in Quebec, we've actually been having meetings with the federal government, both Women and Gender Equality, and recently we met with justice, representatives of justice, and have shared with them the report, shared with them many, many other documentation.
What kind of reception do you get?
They're interested. They are open. They haven't said no, so that's a good sign. But one of the things that we spent the time to do is to show them how it's being done everywhere in other jurisdictions. So there are other countries that in Latin America that have actually used the term femicide in their criminal codes, and have provided a framework that Canada can follow, right? That Canada can use in order to bring femicide into sort of the public understanding. I also want to go back to the issue about accountability and whether having it in the criminal code is going to make the type of difference that we hope it will. I think having it in the criminal code will raise awareness. It will help people come to a common understanding. But Canada has the most beautifully drafted, very explicit legislation on the record, but it doesn't translate into implementation and accountability. I'll give you the example of Daniela Malia, who was murdered in November by her former boyfriend.
Yeah.
Right, and how she called, right? Black women don't call. Black women don't want to call the police because we understand that there is this inherent anti-black racism that exists. But for her, this young 21-year-old, to feel that she had no other recourse.
And he'd been stalking her for
and he had been
3 days or something before.
He'd been stalking her, but 2 police officers who were trained, right? And Toronto police have protocols on how to handle domestic violence cases. 2 police officers showed up, interviewed her for 39 minutes, interviewed him for 3, and then went away and said that it was a she said. 3 days later, or 72 hours later, he killed her. So to me, that is another example of how we can have legislation in the books that is very explicit, but unless the system and the culture of accepting violence towards women, accepting violence towards Black and Indigenous women, unless the culture shifts, nothing is going to change.
I think the police officer at the center of this is under investigation right now.
He pled guilty, and I understand that Daniela's parents, her dad and sisters, are saying don't terminate him. He can do a lot of good. And I agree that to sort of focus on one individual or 2 individuals and sort of scapegoating is one way, but it doesn't get at the heart of the culture of this misogyny that exists in policing and the culture of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism that exists. And so, your question is what can be done? For us, one of the things that should be done for in Daniela's case is that the Office of the Coroner of Ontario needs to convene an inquest into this, because an inquest will allow for, again, transparent, if it's done well, transparent review of all the systems and the role that the systems played in order to result in this young woman losing her life.
It would shine a light on the whole thing.
It would shine a light.
Bree, what about that? Give us a sense about, I mean, I guess the cops get blamed for everything, right? Let's understand that. There's a lot of legitimate and not so legitimate criticism of the police. But in your view, are they adequately trained to see the difference between somebody who looks into something for 3 minutes and says this is a domestic dispute and I'm leaving, versus somebody who needs to, who needs to pay more attention and get to the bottom of something?
Yeah, training, I think, is really inherent in how this can be addressed. I think it's not adequate right now for any police service across Canada, I don't think. And again, we need to remember, just like Nneka said, like there's a lot of reasons for that people don't call the police because they don't feel safe to. So part of that is, like, there's a million reasons for that. And one of that is the lack of training and the lack of understanding about how this looks like. Again, the evidence is different than any other sorts of crimes. So it's hard. Without that training and without that lens of understanding, the police officer often will miss what's needed to see. And then it puts the women at further risk after making that call. So the system actually just keeps people from making that call and reporting.
Megan, I really want your experience as Vice Chair of the Police Services Board in London, Ontario. When you try to raise these kinds of issues, I'm wondering what kind of reaction you get around the table.
Well, there are a few things. First of all, it's very clear that police service board members are not to interfere with operational issues, and many of these issues are considered to be operational issues.
But this is policy. This is not necessarily operations.
Well, we have policy. So we have a mandatory charge policy where the primary aggressor is meant to be arrested. What we see is they are sometimes, and most times in London, they are arrested, they are charged. They go down to the police station, they're released immediately. There's no place for the woman to go. So oftentimes, even though there's a non-association order, she goes back to stay with him because otherwise she has no place to go. She's worried about the income that is lost because of this situation to her partner. And so there are many factors. It's a very complex issue. But for policing, they require a lot more training. We have a situation in London where 100 police officers are currently off work on stress leave. So it's hard to do training when you are facing such a shortage of police officers to be there. Like, who's going to do the training and how are we going to rotate this through when people in London are currently waiting 13 minutes for a police officer to respond to a 911 call?
How many cops on the force in London?
I should know that. It's 600.
600 or something?
So, do you know? I can't remember.
That sounds right. You
Yeah,
get 5,000 in Toronto, so
yeah.
you have to assume
So,
it's... So 100,
you know,
100
these-
out of 600 are on stress leave?
Yeah, there's 100 officers, and including civilians, on stress leave. So, you know, these are major issues. And when NECA talks about the inquiry, I agree. There has to be inquests into these things. But however, I'm always shaded about inquests because I remember the May Isles case dating back 20 some odd years where Randy Isles killed his partner, Arlene May. And there was an inquest into this with a number of recommendations, 280 or so recommendations. And I'm still advocating that those recommendations be implemented. And so for me, this is an issue about women and girls. Women and girls who are not considered to be free in society, women and girls who are inferior in the minds of so many in society, women and girls who don't have equal rights. How are we ever going to pop out of that situation? I've seen since COVID that women's rights have gone backwards.
It got worse during
we
COVID,
have
didn't it?
fewer rights. You know, so you fight all your life for human rights and women's rights, and at the end of the day, you have a pandemic, and they all go back so many years. It's going to take another 25 years to catch up. It's a very difficult situation for women. Do police have a role? Absolutely. They have a key role to play. So do doctors, and so do nurses, and so do all professionals, and so do neighbors. We all have to come together and work to prevent the deaths of women and girls in society.
NECA, I've got 30 seconds left. Make one last point, if you would. Where are we going here?
We need to go further, and we need to do better, and we need to do better for especially women and girls who are on what my colleague Dr. Ida Farrakhan calls those on the margins of the margins. So there are women, Indigenous women, Black women, women and girls living with disabilities, women and girls living in rural communities, newcomer immigrant women, women who are engaged in the sex trade. All of those are at higher risks of femicide, and society needs to stop faffing about and actually start doing something that is more concrete and more tangible and more accountable and transparent.
That sounds like a British term.
It
Faffing about?
Yes.
Is that what you said? I haven't heard that one before. How do you spell that?
Faff to F-A-F-F-I-N-G.
That's a good one. All right. Boy,
fooling
look at what
around.
we're learning today.
Yeah, we-
Mr. Director, can I have a three-shot, please, so I can thank our guests? That's NECA McGregor, who didn't do any faffing about on our program today, along with Megan Walker from the London Police Services Board, Bree Wologroski from the Feminist Alliance for International Action, joining us from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I want to thank all three of you for coming on to TVO tonight and helping us understand this issue so much better. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Canadians played video games, and after the pandemic era that put adults and kids online so much, gaming reached an even broader audience for fun and learning. That experience revealed both the potential and problems with video games for youth and the rest of us. How can parents, teachers, students, or any gamer keep the good and lose the bad? Let's ask. In San Diego, California, Julia Rivard-Dexter, co-founder and CEO of Shoelace Learning. In Montreal, Quebec, Jeffrey Dervinsky, director of the International Center for Youth Gambling Problems and High-Risk Behaviors at McGill University. And here in our studio, Christopher Alexander, professor of video games at Toronto Metropolitan University. Welcome to you all. Now, just before we start, in the interest of full disclosure, we'd like to remind everyone that TVO is a provider of the province's distance and online learning, not the agenda or the journalism part of the organization, but the ILC, the Independent Learning Center, which has been a distance learning partner with the Ministry of Education for almost 100 years. And with that, let's talk video games. All right, Julia, I'm going to come to you. According to 2020 stats, 61% of Canadians under the age of 65 played video games fairly regularly. If we look closer into that data, that rate was up 89% amongst those between 6 and 17 years old. Set the stage for us. How prominent are video games right now in our culture today?
I think it's undeniable. They're everywhere. Kids are playing them all the time. I have 4 kids, and I think we do quite a good job at our place in regulating video game time. But it's a great time for them. It's a time for them to engage with their friends. It's a time to learn new skills, and we can't avoid it. It's a new medium. It's an engaging medium. It motivates kids to push themselves to be better. So I think it's something that we should really watch for even more and figure out how we can leverage to deliver learning and things that are positive for kids.
All right, Chris, how about you? How prominent are video games in our culture today?
So I would imagine that the stats are fairly high. As you just mentioned, video games are prevalent not only via playing, but also in how they've influenced things like our cell phone UI and the way that people interact, chat, cultural concerts, and the like. So they're there. They're a predominant space in our culture right now, I think.
All right, and Jeffrey, let's fill out the rest of it. How would you say, when we look at video games in our culture today, how prominent is it?
It is very prominent. We know that 98% of young boys are actually playing video games, and we know that it's been normalized. So it's not atypical. We no longer have to sit at our consoles and play the video games. We go online. We can play them on our smartphones. We could play them on our iPads or on our laptops.
All right. Chris, in your TED Talk, or your recent TED Talk, you argue that video games can help people tap into and level up the way they learn. Break this down for us.
So in the TED Talk, I talk about how video games can cater to human learning, the way that humans engage with information via audio, text, and video, how they can enhance online instruction. So we've got people that are streaming, and the components of how we stream, how we end up appearing online is a part that can enhance online instruction, and how video games themselves always provide clear objectives and how that would be useful within the context of a classroom. You starting to learn something, knowing exactly where you're going, and then subsequently what the reward will be at the end.
All right. Jeffrey, I'm going to come to you. The World Health Organization has recognized gaming addiction as a disorder, and you were on the advising committee for that. What makes this a clinically diagnosed condition?
Well, what we've noticed worldwide is there's a growing body of literature which has not only talked about the positive aspects of video game playing, but also the negative aspects. That when individuals become overly involved, in a study that we did in Ohio, we found that over 60% of young people in high school and in junior high are playing more than 2 hours a day on their video games. And so this became a real problem because it was interfering with a wide variety of issues with respect to their socialization. Eating disorders were resulting from this, and a wide variety of psychological behaviors. And so as a result, the World Health Organization looked at all the research and decided that they should include it in their ICD-11 as a potential disorder.
All right. Julie, I want to get your take, and I'm going to get Chris's take on that as well. Clinically recognized as an addiction. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to recognize that not all games are created equal. There's a lot of games that give kids experiences that are positive experiences. And And I think that there's also the argument, and I know there's a criticism of the gaming community that this is an argument they always make, but it is also the role of parents to step in and make sure that kids are not engaging too much in screen time generally, gaming and additional screen time. I do understand, though, it can cross a line. It can cross a line for kids, and it can turn into addictive behavior, and that's a problem. And we have to address it, absolutely. It doesn't mean that we don't use video games for good, but I think it is something that we have to get more savvy about as a society, as parents, as educators, to make sure that our kids are engaging in healthy screen time. And I know there's a way to do that with video games.
Chris?
So I love the conversation surrounding the potential of the addiction, but I really enjoyed the suggestion about parenting. Now, some of my work delves into internet gaming disorder, which affects roughly 0.5 to 1% of the global population. And what we also look at is digital parenting, which refers to parents, for some reason or the other, can't afford to spend time with their kids, and as a result are giving them technology as a result. So the question that I think we often should be asking is, who controls access to the video games? And again, as mentioned, all games are not created equal. Which kinds of games are creating these kinds of issues that were described by the WHO?
All right. I want to play part of your TED Talk. Let's get a roll on that.
But I'm also using the mechanics of video games to trick students into exploring complex concepts like history, sexism, racism, corporate culture, and tokenism while we play this game together.
All right. In that you're setting up sort of what's your students and how you sort of teach them sort of the other side of video games, not just, points and sort of levels and all of that. There's a whole other level to it. Tell us a little bit more about what you're trying to explain.
So right there, I'm talking about how when we look at things that span outside of just the playing of video games, there's so much more we can learn. That specific example is from a video game called Virginia, where you play as it is a newly hired FBI agent who is tasked with internally investigating another person, female, who just happens to be the only one in the precinct. And the game itself is based on a true story. So in my classroom, I have students take on the role of Ann Tarver and play live in front of 271 students with mics unlocked. And oftentimes, it's the first time that they see hands that don't look like theirs in the game. That's a conversation. It's the first time you'll pull up, no spoilers, to a particular gas station and something happens and you realize it's happening as a result of who you are and what you look like. And we talk about that. But then the students have to go and build video games based on their own experiences. And that, to me, is the true power of the medium, storytelling. We keep talking about inclusion. How about teaching students how to build that inclusion themselves?
Very, very interesting. All right, Julia, you founded the organization Shoelace Learning, which combines gaming, psychology, and development to provide game-based learning solutions. I'm hoping you can break down the difference here between gamification and game-based learning.
Sure. I think we see a lot of gamification in learning. So that might be a learning program that uses badges, rewards, currencies to help kids get motivated. Game-based learning is different in that you're using the game as the medium to deliver the learning. So it's game first, and the learning is delivered based on triggers that kids run into as they're playing the game. What it does really well is it enhances motivation to do the learning. And that's what we need. I've spent years shadowing teachers in schools, and kids are checked out. They're checked out of their learning, and then in their home environments, they've got super rich mediums that they're engaging with, and we need to meet them where they're at. And so game-based learning is, I still believe it's really emerging. I haven't seen a lot of great examples of where it's been done well, but I see huge potential in this sector.
Jeffrey, you work with many youth and parents who deal with gaming addiction at the center. I'm hoping you can share with us sort of how those conversations begin, but ultimately, how is it that you are helping everyone involved there?
Well, let me just say that I certainly agree with Julia when we look at games are not all created equally. And we're looking at gaming as a global area here, but different games have different components to them. Not all are educational. We have first-person shooter games that also create a wide variety of problems. But typically, we get calls from parents, all the time saying, my child is gaming too much. He's only interested in gaming. He doesn't want to go out and socialize with his friends. He doesn't even want to come up for dinner unless I bring him his dinner because he's so involved in the gaming. And that they have a difficult time getting their children to stop the gaming and doing other activities, whether they be educational activities, social activities, recreational activities. And while it's really important, and both Chris and Julia mentioned the importance of parents in this, parents are frustrated. They don't know what to do. And when they start setting limits and their children don't adhere to those limits, they throw their hands up and they give up and they say, you know, there's no point in doing this anymore because all we're doing is fighting. But this is becoming a major problem. It's difficult for parents to identify the amount of time their children will be gaming because we don't know what the adverse consequences are. So children who want to game more on the weekends are fine. If they're gaming to the detriment of their academic work or their socialization, this is a problem.
Julia, how can we promote responsible gaming?
Well, you know, I think it starts really young, right? As a parent, again, parent of 4, I've seen it. When kids have an iPad for a while, and you try to take it away, you get extremely bad behavior, and you have to be disciplined. You have to make sure that you're disciplined with your kids at a super early age. And teaching this digital responsibility at an early age is what sets them up for the future, and it's no different. It's just like eating healthy. You know, you really want your kids to understand that early so that they can, employ those techniques later in life and be healthy. I also think just thinking of the design of these games is so important. Making sure that you're inspiring positive behaviors. One of the beautiful things about gaming is that it gives you a space for positive failure, right? It builds confidence. Kids are struggling with confidence these days because there aren't many spaces where there's positive failure. And so I think really identifying the ways that games can be successful in building strong, capable, confident young people is kind of the first step, and then building, around that to make sure that we're being thoughtful and deliberate in our design of video games for kids. And then we have to be responsible. It's our responsibility as adults, as educators, to make sure that we're putting the good games in front of kids so that we are building future generations who are capable of doing what we need them to do, which is to think critically, to have confidence, and to want to participate. So
Chris, I do want to get your take on that, only because I feel like you are in that 1% who probably, when we call you the professor of video games, you play a lot of video games. And this is something that you've done as a kid, as a youth, and you still do today. How do you balance these conversations and promote responsible gaming while also indulging in the beauty that is video games?
Excellent question. So I've been playing an average of 2 to 4 video games since the age of 8. And as the age of 14, I had said to my parents, I just want to play video games all day, every day. And my parents said to me, absolutely, as long as you pay for it. Uh-oh. And then I had to find my first job, and that was at a local restaurant. Couldn't wait until I was 16, but they empowered me with the idea of, if you want to do something, you're going to pay for it. You want to play online? Oh, guess who's paying for the internet? So this was my empowerment, and now that's what I teach my daughters. When they're interested in something, how are we going to do this? But the biggest strength is teaching people to build. When I wanted to play online games via a computer, I had to build it. So I learned how to build a computer, and that's part of what I'm doing now, trying to teach kids how to build and provide for themselves and to help support themselves, because there was no situation where I could have said to my parents, I want, and then finish the sentence. Everybody needed to work in order to get the things that they wanted to do. So that's my approach. I just talk about how I was raised and how I do it now.
All right, I want to pick up on something that Julia had mentioned in terms of the rich mediums that we have, that students have after school. And one of the things I'm sure parents may not know what it is, but they've heard it, is Twitch. It's like, what is this platform that my child is watching hours and hours of programming, watching someone play video games, or so forth. And there's the argument that, you can learn a lot more than just that. Can video games and digital platforms like Twitch replace school curriculum and class instructions? Or is there, maybe I'm going too far, but oh no.
Not
okay.
at all. So in the recent talk, I talk about how Twitch, owned by Amazon, is an online streaming platform where people are known to watch other people play video games, but there are people that are teaching others how to paint, how to play piano, how to cook, and even how to code. And so these are things where you're looking at, if in 2019, 2.78 million concurrent viewers were watching, it can't all be entertainment. And so when you look at the nuance, you look at the Amazon categories of art, programming, there's science, there are people that are learning how to paint miniatures. And I often bring Twitch into the classroom to show 3D artists, for example, how they can start giving their own superpowers of artistry leverage by connecting with community members. And that's part of the power of Twitch. But on top of that, there's incredibly high production value on Twitch. So the production values that we see on some of these streamers, were we to implement that in traditional classroom instruction for traditional online instruction, promise you engaging would be higher because it looks like what they see when they go home. And as Julia said, meeting them where they are.
All right, Julia, I want to get your take on that as well. I might be going a whole stretch here by saying, does something like Twitch and other digital platforms slowly replace our educators in some platform, or is it just the platform that changes itself? But can video games and digital platforms sort of replace the curriculum or class instruction?
I think today we're in an era where it's enhancement, it's augmentation for teachers. These are tools for teachers to use. I believe in teachers deeply as coaches, as motivators. The problem is today they don't have that chance in the classroom to be able to do the teaching, the motivating, the coaching, because they're so busy managing behavior, because we're losing our kids. They're just not engaged. Now, do I think we can replace teachers? I don't think so. I really hope we continue to have a model where teachers are coaching the kids. But I do see video games evolving to be more transformative in education. We are going to get to a point where we're in immersive environments where we can actually learn by doing in-game spaces, which is really exciting. We're not quite there yet, and we're going to need very good research-driven design once we get there to make sure we're providing kids with great experiences. But it is possible to have a really different, transformative education experience, and we're heading that way.
I want to stick with you because I want to ask, in the ideal world, in the perfect world, where these two, what for the longest time was there were separate realms, we bring them together. What does that look like in a classroom, in the perfect world to you, where we use something like Twitch or another digital platform and we're in a classroom?
Well, I don't think you have to be in a classroom. I think we're reinventing what schools look like too. And I think that the idea that we are no longer in a position where we have one person teaching to many. We're in the position now where we can have many teaching to one. And that's one of the things I think is so exceptional about using technology in education is we can help young people broaden their context, really have a huge number of data points from which to start thinking critically, thinking creatively, and we need future generations to have these skills to be able to solve some of the complex problems we have. So I see a very different school of the future, one that uses digital to be able to enhance and transform education, and teachers and coaches there to really help kids be move down that path in ways that they're excited to evolve. So I think it's going to look very different.
All right, I want to change gears a little bit. Of course, we are, still going through the pandemic, and I know that had really changed the way that we consumed gaming. Jeffrey, how did the pandemic affect our gaming habits?
Well, we know that young people or even older people have played a lot more games during the pandemic. Parents were working from home, their children were home from school, and parents were trying to focus in what they had to do. And so in many cases, they often told the kids, if you're finished with your work, go play games, go on your computer, go on your iPhone. And so this has produced a whole generation of young people who played a lot longer on their consoles or on their smartphones or on their computers. And as a result, it's now hard to wean them off of this. I think it's really important, and both Julia and Chris mentioned that parents have a very important role in this. I don't think most parents really know what their children are playing on their computers or on their smartphones. And so I think it's incumbent upon them to actually look at the games that they're playing. And maybe rather than just shutting off all the games, they could balance those games. Some educational, some recreational, some much more enjoyable for the young person.
All right, Chris. We saw many students struggling with online learning during COVID. How do we effectively incorporate video games into school and work environment? Of course, as a professor, COVID was probably not kind to you as a professor, with students staring at you at a screen on Zoom, just kind of looking at you with blank faces and so forth. And what I'm trying to get at is, I think there is this connection that needs to happen. You had mentioned sort of the level of production that we get when we see gaming, and how we do that. How do we effectively incorporate those two together?
So I actually saw an increase in engagement in my classrooms online because my setup mimics that of Twitch streamers, because I myself am a Twitch streamer and a YouTuber. So I afford the students the ability to add comments live during class, which appear on screen over my feed, as well as part of my class in teaching game design is running a roulette throughout 270 students, and the lucky winner gets to take control of my machine and play the game like Virginia in front of their peers for the first time and dissect it. We have a live Let's Play, which is common on Twitch. We all play together and dissect the game, and we ask questions. For research, we call that Think Aloud Protocol. So I'm inducing Think Aloud Protocol during my live stream class that's hybrid. And the pandemic has ended, and we've returned back to Toronto Metropolitan University in the Red Bull Gaming Hub. I live stream my in-person classes as well, because I believe it can and could be a standard, so that students who are familiar with my approach to teaching could stay at home if they wanted to, because I'm teaching them how to build video games. Some of them have the computers at home, but those who don't can come into the lab, and we're all working along. They can talk to each other back and forth. So I saw it as a huge advantage to show post-secondary education and the world how we can transform education in a way that mimics what our students are used to engaging with.
All right. Julia, I want to come back to you because I want to get some sort of real-world examples of what you think, whether they're video games, whether there are platforms that really do a good job of mixing both the education side and the video game themselves. Maybe not your favorite video game, but video games that you think are doing the job or are getting there.
So I think that one of the best examples I've seen, and one that we've tried to emulate at Shoelace with our games, is Dreambox. It's a math game, very adaptive to each unique learner's abilities, which is beautiful. Again, confidence building, so you don't feel like you're at the bottom of the class. So that's a great one. There's also a Quebec-based company that's focused on giving teachers the opportunity to build games that they can deliver their assignments with, which is awesome. The way we're doing it at Shoelace is a little bit different. We've built a learning platform with adaptive learning and the ability for teachers to deliver assignments, but through any mobile game a child chooses to play. So we've built it to plug games into, and then we use the game triggers to inspire the learning content. And I think that's an interesting approach, because kids are smart about what they like, so we can't force feed them games necessarily. We want to give them agency to be able to choose games that suit their likes, but in a way that actually enhances their learning. So not a ton of great examples yet. I really do think we're still in kind of the baby phase of game-based learning, but new things popping up all the time.
Jeffrey, video games aren't going anywhere. We established that from the conversation. We just established it from the onset. It's a fine line in terms of, you had used the word, an example that, how do we wean off some of our youth in sort of their gaming? But there's a fine line there. Of course, gaming will be there in terms of how it is being used. Any advice to parents, to students that you have that you think that they should be taking into account as we move forward in the next 5-10 years?
I think Julia's point earlier was that we have to really start when children are very young. And what we really need to do is set limits and also help children maintain those limits in terms of the amount of time and the frequency in which they're gaming, as well as the types of games that they're actually engaged in. Some of the games also have what are referred to as loot boxes, and these actually stimulate or simulate gambling. And not only that, but people are telling us that their children are losing lots and lots of money playing these games.
All right. Chris, you teach video game design. You wrote a paper on inclusivity of video games. I want to get into that. How could the new generation of game designers shape this industry for the better?
So I can give some examples from some of my students this year. There are games about immigration from China that my students are working on. There are games about coping with celiac disease that one of my students who has celiac disease is building herself. There are other games about being seen and feelings of being seen, a third-person walking simulator with conversation that's being built by another student. There are games about flight. There are games about mystery, magic. The number one way we can include ourselves is to include ourselves. You can build these spaces, and there are platforms like Unity, Unreal Engine, and this is what we're teaching, among other platforms, for you to be able to tell your story. If there's an issue with loot boxes, you can build a game that doesn't have loot boxes. If there's an issue where you don't see yourself reflected, you have the ability to build yourself into the narrative, in addition to a narrative that speaks directly to you and others like you.
Very, very interesting stuff. Julia, the last question goes to you. What are you most excited about when we look at video games and the future?
I'm most excited about educators like Chris. most excited about the fact that there's a new generation of educators who understand the power of being able to motivate kids in a new medium, and who are willing to experiment and try new things and get kids engaged. It's a beautiful thing to see these teachers work in classrooms and really be the heroes for their kids, because they understand that there's a way to really get them engaged and motivated. And yeah, Chris is just a perfect example of that.
I'm not going to leave you here blushing, so maybe you get the truly last response in terms of what you're excited about.
Thank you, Julia. I can't wait to chat with you after this. I just feel that we have a responsibility to understand and dissect the medium. In my classroom now, we have both men and women programming games, and we talk about what's this discussion about inclusion, and many of the folk in our class are like, wait a second, I'm being part of the change. To inspire the change is one of the greatest honors I'll ever have as an educator, but now is the time.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Chris, Julia, Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us on the program tonight. Really, really great stuff.
Thank you.
It's great. Thanks.
And that is the agenda for Monday, April 17th, 2023. Tomorrow, Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen is with us on his impending trip to orbit the moon. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.